had to spend some time meditating on precisely how I wanted to approach this next video. The video specifically focuses on the psychotic and the unconscious dimensions, the psychotic and the unconscious threats that are presented to consciousness because of the coronavirus, because of the emerging global pandemic. I want to say before I get into the details that here I am categorizing psychosis as a state of consciousness which searches for meaning, reasons, and causes of the event and the consequences of the event, which are either not true, totally absent, or completely fabricated. And the unconscious dimension is the way in which this global pandemic cannot be reduced or brought back to conscious control. It's an event which is outside of conscious control, which is the reason why it presents a threat to conscious psychosis. So, to get into the psychotic dimension of this phenomenon, we have to start with the fact that our most trusted scientific and political authorities, whether they be epidemiologists or virologists in the political sphere, they could be heads of state, they could be heads of important global organizations like the World Health Organization, are essentially going to be perceived, and in many ways are, not of their own doing, but are failed others. And they're failed others or failed authorities in the sense that our scientific authorities, our scientific others, are not going to be able to produce a vaccine, perhaps not even within the year. Our political authorities, our political others, are going to be confronting the systemic limits of our ability to handle this situation, the types of expectations and requests and demands in many cases on the general population are thus going to be emerging in this gap, emerging in this failure of the world health scientific political system, basically. And this failure of our scientific and political others is the location where psychosis can emerge. What psychosis will be doing is trying to fill in this gap, trying to fill in this failure of the other, to provide some alternative meaning, to provide some alternative reason, or to provide some alternative cause as to why this is happening. So, for example, I've already heard there are many people talking about conspiracy theories about the virus being invented in a laboratory somewhere and being systematically released in certain populations, or that this is being designed by a powerful elite to destroy and then implement a totally new political economic system, perhaps more totalitarian, perhaps more exploitative, perhaps more regulatory, or conspiracy theories about even the mandatory implementation of vaccines as some sort of manipulation of our bio or biopolitical manipulations. And what these psychotic conspiracy theories are doing is basically generating complete or totalizing or global explanations for a situation that simply has no complete or global or totally satisfying explanation. It is satisfying an emotional drive that humans have to basically close the unconscious, to reduce everything back to a full conscious explanation of the situation, which will provide inner peace and inner calm and inner integrity, because there is a huge discomfort or uncomfort when something is happening which is completely unknown and brings us into a state of potential fear and panic, basically. No consciousness enjoys knowing that there is a virus on the loose, and that the entire way in which we live our lives is going to be drastically transformed. So the reason why, but I should add that the reason why the psychotic explanations are dangerous is because they take our attention and our time and our energy away from real problems, and they direct our time and our energy and attention towards made up stories that basically don't solve the problem, because they further erode trust. If I could say one principle here that's important to reflect on, it's that there is no group, there is no cult, there is no organization that knows what's going on, or that is pulling the strings from behind the veil, so to speak. This is purely an event which has a irreducible unknown universally to all humans. And so I think that ultimately the tendency towards psychotic explanation is going to become more tempting in the coming weeks, potentially months or year, and that we have to do our best to stay sharp in our minds and to resist the temptation towards a pseudo explanation of the situation. And in order to do that, I think it's important that we understand what the unconscious is. So the unconscious is a meaningless real. It's the opposite of consciousness. Consciousness searches for meaning. Consciousness searches for reasons for why something is happening. Consciousness wants to have a complete causal explanation for the world. However, the unconscious in itself is a meaningless real with no reason. In other words, there's no deeper meaning or reason or cause as to why the coronavirus is now a global pandemic. It simply is a new reality which cannot be, again, sublated or integrated or reduced back to our consciousness. It's outside of our consciousness and outside of our conscious control. So coming to terms with that basically means coming to terms and accepting that. Coming to terms with that basically means that our system, our way of knowing, the others whom we can trust, are going to have to undergo an evolution. They're going to have to undergo a transformation structurally. And there is no way to know what that structure, what those others, what our networks will look like after the transformation. There's no group pulling the strings of the whole thing. It's all going to be happening very contingently, emergently. The system is too complex for any one group to be directing the whole thing. And the unconscious is way too far outside of any consciousness or any group of consciousness for it to be pulled back in by that group. So in terms of metaphysics, I think an important concept here is the idea of predestination. There is a way in which our global system is becoming deeper and deeper in terms of its integration, its internal integration in itself. That is in some sense a predestination, which is basically being caused, as I talked about in the last video, because the negativities experienced in our system are going to be increasingly global, increasingly pulling us together authentically. If something happens in China, it happens in America, it happens in Africa, it happens in Europe, it happens in South America. And that will continue to happen. So there is a type of predestination which does involve our political and our economic world system. But there is no way to know in advance what the nature of that political and economic system will be. There's no small group, there's no one individual, there's no anything, no consciousness that can know in the end what that will look like in the future. Which is why conspiracy theories can be so dangerous, because they give us the illusion that that is the case. And I think they distract our attention from the little day-to-day things in our lives with our friends and our families that we can do to move through this crisis and to build a different type of relating with each other that will serve basically a global predestination, the coming together of humanity towards a more just, a more fair, a more equal, a more humane system. So the last thing I want to say basically then is the meaning and the reason and the cause which can stimulate this temptation towards conspiracy theory, this global explanation of everything that's going on, is a pseudo-explanation, but deeper than that, the real meaning and the reason and the cause has to be found locally in your day-to-day consciousness. It has to be found in a new sense of the way in which we relate to each other locally. And the conspiratorial tendency, the psychotic tendency, is basically, in my view, an imaginary screen which blocks that real. Because when it comes to being human, when it comes to being just simply human with others in our day-to-day life, those small things, those simple things mean the world, and they're sometimes the most difficult. Just to be with self can sometimes be the most difficult. So I would just emphasize that this is, in my view, the test of this event. So, leaving you, trying to summarize this video, psychosis as a threat, I think, in the coming weeks, in the coming months, possibly even the year. Psychosis being this temptation towards a all-explanatory theory of everything that's happening in the world. The deeper reason or meaning behind, which isn't actually there. And because this event is so novel, because this event is so unprecedented, because the consequences are so unknown, there will be an increasing tendency to want to go towards those types of conspiracy theories, to identify something to hold on to that would give a deeper certainty. And in terms of the unconscious, this event merely reveals what is always the case for consciousness, which is that the unconsciousness cannot be reduced to consciousness. The unconscious is now resetting the way in which consciousness has set up a world system. Consciousness is going to have to, through its links, through its relations, through its networks, construct a different way of being, to construct a different political and economic mode, and that will have a type of global predestination involved in it, just by the nature of the unconscious phenomena that will continue to unfold, not just the coronavirus, but other related climate and economic political events. So I hope that that gives some strange form of clarity. I had to meditate a while to bring this video out just because of how to approach the complexity of it and with adequate nuance. But I hope that served, and I'll see you in the next video.